Hey guys, Chris at the Ultimate Recycler. I'm in my home workshop tonight and we're going to have a bit of a look at this vintage crystal dressing table clock. It's one I picked up in a box of stuff. It doesn't work. It's the winder just won't turn. It feels like it's, well, what they would call overwound, but I'll explain that term a little bit in a tick. We're just going to see if we can fix it up, and I'm going to do a few basic repair videos for my channel and just try and encourage you to have a go, because that's the biggest requirement for fixing things, is just to really give it a go. You don't have much to lose, especially on something that doesn't work, and if we can save it, well, it stops it going into the waste stream. So these are pretty common items. This one's probably 1930s, maybe 40s. It's a basic wind-up movement. I think this one's French, a lot of them are English or German. And as I said, they're quite common. We'll just pan up the top shelf here in my workshop, and you will see quite a row of clocks, and there's another crystal dressing table clock up there. So I like to have a go at trying to fix these things. I'm by no means an expert in clocks, but sometimes with some basic mechanical knowledge and a bit of nous, we can get them going. Right, so we need to take it out of this housing, and there's just 3 retainers here. They're a bit bent and a bit rusty, but I think they should come out all right. We'll have to take the winder out, and basically it just clamps it in between the housing here, and it should pretty much just fall out the front. So we'll undo these retainers. They shouldn't take much. Usually these clocks aren't very secure, and a lot of times I get them and they're actually, all this is wobbly because they've come loose. So these are going to come out all right. Oh, it looks like the little studs are actually bent, so I don't know if you can see that, but it's rusty one end and bent, so it's had a bit of a rough life, but we'll get into it and see if we can fix it. So these clocks, I think I said they were probably 1930s or 40s. They were quite common. Even though they're called a crystal dressing table clock, the housing on these is really just a pressed glass. They're not actually crystal. And we have to undo this winder. And they come in all different shapes and sizes, and you can even get green ones, and even what they call uranium glass, which glow under black light, and they can hold pretty good value, those ones. All right, so there you go, pretty basic, and it's a fairly standard size, and I forget how, I think it's about 2.5 inch or something, and you'll find that these movements pretty well you can interchange. So if we actually had a crack through this piece, or a big chip out of one corner or something, we wouldn't have to worry about this. We could save the movement and we'd put it in another housing. But anyway, our job tonight is to see if we can get this going, and that will wash up fine, so we'll give that a wash up. There doesn't appear to be any damage. Now, the movement itself, well, they talk about being overwound, and technically there's no such thing, because as you can see there, the spring is wound up tight, so it's fully wound. Now, overwound would indicate that you've gone past the point of winding it, which would mean a breakage. So when people say overwound, they really mean it's just wound up tight and the spring is fully charged, so to speak, but it won't drive the clock because something's bound up or something's broken. So overwound is a little bit of an inaccurate term. So in this case, our spring doesn't appear to be broken. It's wound up tight. It should have all the stored energy there, and it can't release it. So the first thing I look for in these is, quite often they don't work simply because they've dried out. There's no lubrication in them. Rarely you do have actual damage, but quite often, if we just flick this is the balance wheel, and it's spinning one way and not the other, so there is something mechanically wrong in there. But quite often I'll give that a flick and it'll start running and stop pretty quickly, and that's just a lubrication issue. They're pretty easy to fix. This one I'm just discovering now has some other problem, so I'll have to get a magnifying glass and see what I can spot. Okay, time flies when you're having fun, hey? What I've done here is that it's unwinding the spring because I've released, well, I didn't release, I actually loosened out the balance wheel. There's a retainer here which actually, what's the best way to describe it? It actually puts pressure on each end, and the axle for the balance wheel is like a needle on each end, and it sits in a little bearing, and this basically backs one of the bearing caps off to make it loose, and by making it loose it then allowed the gear to flick past the little stopper. Now there's two stoppers and that oscillates, and I can't remember the names of all these. I'm not a clock expert. It might be called an escapement or something if I remember correctly, but I'm sure there'll be technical terms and some of you guys will know, so feel free to add that to the comments. But by loosening that off, it's allowed it to slip past here. Now I don't think it should still slip past here. This should rock back and forward. So I think one of the little pins is bent there. So I would suggest that this clock may have been dropped at one stage and it's caused something to come out of alignment. So I might as well let it unwind completely. It's nearly there. And then I can try and tighten these bearings up and try and get those pins in the right spot. Maybe a little bit of adjustment. This is certainly more complicated than most. Most of them are just purely a dry lubrication issue, and it kind of gummed things up. But look, we'll see how we go with this one. We'll see if we can fix it. It's certainly, all the gear train seems to be working fine. I don't think there's any that are missing teeth or any severe damage. And as you saw before, the hands were working fine, just going very fast. So it's still unwinding a bit. I'll have a look at getting this balance wheel back in spot in the right position, and the little thing that works against it, we'll see if we can line that up. So I think I've got it aligned, and let me get the tweezers in here so you can see, I've tightened the balance wheel back up. So it does have a little bit of end float, and so it's not super tight on the bearings. I don't know what the actual requirements would be, but I'm not going to worry about being too particular. And by giving the balance wheel a little bit of a flick, you can see how it operates this little escarpment assembly here, if that's what it's called. So one of those fine pins, you can see the pin there. The one on the other side was actually bent substantially, and it was allowing the wheel to spin past it without being stopped. And what had happened then was the little locator that works on a pin on top of the balance wheel had gone round past it and locked up, and that's why the thing was wound fully tight but wasn't releasing. So that appears to be operating as it should, and even tick-tocks a bit, but of course it's fully unwound now, so it's a good chance to just put a little bit of lube on some of these points. I usually just put a little bit of clock oil on just the little bearing points. You don't want to get a can of CRC or RP7 or WD-40 and just spray it, because that's the worst thing you can do for a clock movement. It doesn't want lubrication everywhere, and if you put too much on, it tends to drain away from the holes. So just a small dot of clock oil or good quality lubricant on these points. Now also I'm going to try and just get a little bit in on top of that shaft where the balance wheel is, and one at the bottom, and it looks like it's fairly free, and then I'll wind it up and hopefully we're ticking. So I'm not actually going to inject myself here. I'm just using, this actually squeezes a little bit too much out, but this is just a little needle oiler that you can pick up on eBay, and I've got a bit of clock oil in here, although this one seems a bit runny, and I don't want too much oil in there, as I just mentioned. So we just got to get a few bits of oil into the important parts, and the needle's a good way of doing it, because you can get it exactly where you need it and you don't have an oily mess. The other thing about putting too much oil on these things is it attracts dust, and then they gum up, and what you get, instead of lubrication, it almost creates a grinding paste. So I'll go through and just check any other points that need a bit of lube, and we'll wind it up and see if it's going to keep ticking. And there we have it. Looks like I've had some success. So the good thing about these clock movements is that whilst they're fairly precise, and it amazes me how they could make such fine movements, especially in watches back in the early days, they're not so precise that you can't you know, get away with just bending a little bit. Like that little pin back in there was just bent out of position, and I just pushed it across with the screwdriver. And she pretty well, once I tightened this bearing assembly up, it pretty well just started ticking straight away. And that's running beautifully and smooth now. So there you go, it's worth having a go. As I said, it was no harm in trying. If I hadn't have been able to fix it, I would have put it back in the crystal case and probably just put $5 on it as a project for someone. Now that it's going, we've spent probably only 15 minutes, if that. I'll put it back together. I'll wash the crystal housing up first, just so it sparkles. Maybe just give a little bit of fine steel wool around the edge, just to clean up a little bit of corrosion there. But suddenly we've got a clock that's working. It should keep, oh, it's stopped now, I think I put my finger on the wheel. It should keep pretty good time. They're adjustable via this lever here. It adjusts the tension on the hairspring. But back together and going, I'll show you what it looks like. And there we go. Gave the case a bit of a polish up. It sparkles now, and you should be able to hear it ticking. It's running beautifully, actually. Running like clockwork, as they say. Pretty happy with that. So in 15 minutes, including the time to wash it up, I didn't get to put any steel wool around there, but it's not too bad. In 15 odd minutes, I've turned a $5 not working clock into, I could put $35 on that in the shop, and I'll wind it up each day. It should work perfectly fine. As I said, there is an adjustment if it runs a bit fast or slow. Just in that little arc there, you can move a little tab across. I didn't worry about fixing these retaining screws. You know, that's as it is. I'd suggest this movement either may have been out of something else, or they made those screws longer to accommodate thicker cases. But that's how it is. It runs, it looks nice, it's a genuine vintage piece. Not quite antique, it needs to be 100 years old to be antique, and this is probably 80 or 90 years old. But a nice little piece for someone's dressing table in a period house. And there's $35 easy. And a quick little fix. Hopefully you got something out of that. Whilst we didn't necessarily keep it at a landfill, we did restore it to working condition. So yeah, very satisfying to do these jobs. So keep an eye on my channel. I'll be doing more of these videos, and hopefully you'll pick up a few little tricks along the way. And as I keep saying, have a go yourself. I hope to inspire people to just try and fix things. It's the best way to learn. Okay, catch you in the next video. Bye.